So, getting into postscript, a certain memory crossed my mind. One time on postscript, we did host Edward Mohomoza, and so, you know, when I saw the word postscript, it hit me and I saw his face. May his soul rest in peace, but nevertheless we soldier on. This morning we're going to be looking into the mathematics game and gambles of Uganda Cranes as they try to qualify themselves for the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations. Now, of course, you know where this all comes from, and there's so many challenges, both for the federation, for the national team, and for the expectations out of all of this fracas for Ugandans. But we're also going to be talking about the effectiveness of the federation in football administration thus far. But just having a background of it, Uganda's first win in Group F takes the Cranes level on 4 points with Taifa Stars jointly in second place. The other day Elvis was telling us it's just a matter of alphabetical order that makes the difference. But behind the already qualified Algeria, you do have Niger at the bottom of that very same group. Now the Cranes definitely have to resume their qualification hunt in June with a home game against Algeria. That's already done and dusted. They won't need that game, and then they will be completing their journey away with Niger. Consequently, this performance of Cranes for qualification slots remains quizzical among Ugandans, all aligned with the technical weaknesses vividly reflected in the team's football display. Now the mathematics kicks in. The pens are out, the papers are on the table, and we are having Ismail Dhakaba Kigongo to help us do the mathematics. I hear, but he was a good mathematics student. Is that the case, sir?
Yes, it is. Good morning, Priscilla. My primary school teacher was called Mr. Michael Okodan, who taught me math all those many years ago. And he must be very, very proud that I can still introduce myself as someone who does math fairly well. Actually, fairly well is an understatement.
I'm itching to make an addition.
What's
I
your
think
addition,
you should add your secondary school mathematics teacher as well. At least from our time in Chibuli.
What's the name? W.A. Walwa? Iwalwa, yes.
Okay.
He also taught me decent math. I'm a 90s student, you know.
So no wonder he's at the helm of sports at the Nation Media Group. But getting into it, as we dive into, you know, the mathematics, should I give you the pen? Because I trust that you do have some, you know, figures to draw for us. But first, Uganda bags the 3 points from Tanzania, but it was really a leap of a miracle. But if we to analyze the normal 90s, all hope was gone, and there was sinking of the ship evidently. But that one win for us in Tanzania has given Uganda a ray of hope. The mathematics has to kick in nevertheless.
Sure, but I do not buy your statement about all hope was gone, because a football game is as long as until the final whistle. There's always bound to be something, and you could almost, for some people, you could almost feel that after Uganda had got through a very difficult first half, played very well in the second, you could almost feel that there was something had to give in the end, and when eventually that goal came from Rogers Mato, there was a bit of inevitability about it. I almost kept saying, if Uganda get a chance here, then they are going to nick it eventually. So while we are going to do a lot of trigonometry now and calculus, because now Uganda is in a situation where at least it's back in Uganda's hands, because what the result in Tanzania did is to hand Uganda the initiative that you go win your games, then you give yourself a very good chance. Had they not won that, then you start doing X's and O's. We want that one to beat the other one. Of course, there's still a bit of that, but now win your 2 games and you're very likely to be in Ivory Coast next year.
Okay, all right. So between the game that they had in Egypt and what happened in Tanzania, which was the better team in terms of the starting 11? And in your analysis, what was done better? And where was it done better? Was it in Egypt that Method maybe did something better, or was it in Tanzania?
The truth is, there was little or no difference. The only difference is the result for me. And that moment, when you're describing Micho's return, or the time he's been in charge of the team, since he returned to the national team fold as the Cranes coach, his team has been producing moments. You do not sit there and say there is a phase where the Cranes team is very, very dominant. Rather, when you're watching a Cranes game, you're sure they're going to produce 1-2 moments or 3, and one of those moments is going to produce a goal. When that moment produces a goal, usually it ends up in a win. Sometimes it is a draw, like we saw from the opening 3 games. Milton Carissa was trying to cross the ball, and that ball ended up in the back of the net. Now that is just one moment, unplanned. You're thinking about one thing, then you get another. So when you're analyzing Micho's teams, or teams that are coached by Micho, or this Cranes team coached by Micho, especially during this AFCON campaign or Nations Cup qualifying campaign, you do not sit there and say we are going to watch some 15 minutes where the Cranes are going to dominate or play structured football. Rather, you wait for those moments, and that moment arrived in the 90th minute or in added time. That was on Tuesday against Tanzania. So that's how maybe you can describe it, but you cannot say that, you cannot sit here and comfortably say that the performance the Cranes put up on Tuesday was wholesomely better than the previous game that was played in Egypt. So the difference is Uganda got 3 points there. They lost 3 points before. They managed to produce a moment. Rogers Mato being set up by Farouk Mia. Actually, before Farouk Mia releases Mato, you do not see anything forming up. Then when he holds on to the ball slightly, somehow you see the opening and he plays that pass into Mato's stride. And suddenly you can see that Mato is through on goal. But if you're going to talk structures and all, I thought there was a very little difference in terms of performances from the 2 games. There was some bit of effort shown by the players, but it was not structured. The effort is there. You can see clearly the players want to win the game.
Right.
But in terms of the 2 games, it's just the result for me that is the difference.
Dhakaba, I know that you have had personal interactions with some of these players. What is the mood for them?
Ever since the game? Ever since the game in Dar es Salaam, they are quite elated. There's a few of them that I was trying to text after the game on Friday and they couldn't respond. But on Tuesday now they could respond.
Many of them came out on social media. When you check out Twitter, many of them tweeted.
Many of them had something to post because it's very difficult on them, and you could almost imagine. While I'm not one of those who belongs to Generation Z that finds that everything on social media is digestible or very important.
Is up for discussion.
Is up for discussion. I think for some of the players and many people involved with the team, they were greatly affected by some of the things that came out on social media in the aftermath of that loss to Tanzania. So the elation is very clear. You could almost tell from the moment the final whistle went. You could almost sense that they had qualified for the AFCON, but they had only won a game and to get back into the qualification picture. So it says a lot about the mode in the side. They needed a lift, and sometimes I'm one of those who always thinks that Ugandan players get away with their bad performances because most of us who have these microphones, and even the ones who have bought their GBs on the phone, would rather go to their handles on our microphones and blame Micho and blame Moses Magoga. I've seen this, I think, my entire 15 years or so doing this job.
Actually, Micho out and Magogo out was trending.
Were trending, yeah. So,
before the game.
But sometimes I want to ask the question, at what point do we ask the players questions? Because I thought the goal that Uganda conceded in Egypt against Tanzania was down to Aziz Kayondo and Joseph Ochaya not communicating. Aziz Kayondo goes in as a centre-back and Ochaya is at sea. So many times players in Uganda get out with everything, and we've cushioned them. And this, I blame all of us, including myself. We've cushioned them from criticism.
I'm the player. You want to criticize me, but let's first analyze the player and what they ought to be getting. Do they get the right training? Do they get the ample time to do the training? Are they remunerated accordingly? Because, I mean, we've had those cases of Babanja, Bachabanja, Badibanja.
Priscilla Abanja. But I've not seen her fail to do her job. I think it's some of his blame game is shielding. For me, it's entirely shielding them from blame. They might lack things while growing up. We all talk about the technical ability. We all talk about the inadequacies of our coaching and our systems across the board. And this is not just football. That's why many times when I come to these forums, I do not like to discuss sport in isolation because sport does not exist in a vacuum. We're in a place where sport and football are all affected by all the inadequacies of our society. So many a time when we have to pick out sportsmen and expect them to be very different from all the others. If everyone takes criticism for not doing their job well, regardless of what training they've had, I think even the footballer should take as much.
Yeah, in the past we've had discussions or arguments with, I've had a disagreement or argument with Ismail, and one time I asked him, when you watch these players and in a particular game, and the player makes a mistake, and then at the end of it all, like Ismail said, it is the coach that is going to take the blame.
Or it's Magogo
Mulindwa. But as an individual, you have to first of all understand your role on the pitch and then try to execute. Now, for example, you find a player in a one-on-one situation with the goalkeeper, a forward one-on-one situation with the goalkeeper, and then he puts the ball wide. In that moment, how does the coach come into play? It is the player who makes the decision. He has the options, maybe to sidestep the goalkeeper, or place the ball beyond the goalkeeper, maybe even chip it over the goalkeeper. He has various options, so he chooses one, and maybe sometimes makes the wrong decision. Then you have to first blame the player who was in that position before you get to the coach, and maybe start talking about how...
Which I actually do see happening for international football. So that argument actually does hold
usually
water.
what happens.
I think for me, and there's a story I love retelling, and I'm going to retell it at this point. I think this is the best time. In 2011, as I walked out of Namboli after the failure of Uganda Cranes to beat Kenya, that was on October 8th, I met fans outside the stadium, and one of them vividly said that the reason why Uganda had not qualified for the AFCON is because Mulindwa had not paid referees. Yeah, Mulindwa mukodo kusente singa deba referee.
That's like corrupting.
Yeah, corrupting the referee. That's what a Ugandan felt. And those are some of the inadequacies. But if you go back to that game, there were chances in that game that Uganda missed. Of course, even the Kenyans, Dennis Olech probably had the best chance of the game, missed it. Then thereafter, I think our friend Sulaiman Mutiaba also missed a very good chance right at the end of the game when Uganda was throwing the kitchen sink at Kenya. Then, so at what point then do we break that down? The inadequacies with the federation, the inadequacies with the coaching system, the inadequacies with the setup. But there are moments where you think the player has to do better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interrogating the players themselves, when it comes to calling up for national duty, of course, the team that we had been used to, the one that you were referring to through the last qualification, was dismantled. Players retired, left for various reasons. So there are gaps and seats to be filled. Nevertheless, the national team has to soldier on. So maybe there comes a case of premature entries into the national team because of the pressure to fill those gaps. And therefore, you end up having players on the national team who have shown as if they're good, but they're not qualified to sit on the national team at the time of that calling. Maybe they needed another stretch of a season or two of study for them to prove themselves worthy. So you do have a crop of young players in there that have joined the national team, trying to make sense of their responsibility and duty on the national team, which then really translates into the skeptical results that we're having.
Valid explanation, I think you gave Priscilla. And these days, the FUFA president Moses Magogo loves to use the word transition. And many a time I'm always hoping he doesn't use the word transition in the NRM caucus because it's not very popular there. It might be popular in football because we use it on a daily basis. Every goal scored is a transition because from a goalkeeper to the defenders and everything. Yes, there's a challenge with the way with so many undercooked players who make it to the national team. That is probably heightened by having a coach in Mitchell who is going to be willing to call up anyone. There's a colleague of ours, Ismail Dhakaba, who was tracking the number of players Mitchell had called up to the national team, and at some point he had gone past 100. And that doesn't make sense, not anywhere in the world, even for a rather not so famous footballing nation like Uganda. You do not call 100 players, even for whatever reason, unless you're going to coach a team for, let's say, 7-9 years, and that doesn't happen with so many national
Actually, he's called up 100 players for one particular campaign or one game.
Exactly.
And he had 25 players in 4 corners of the
country.
The Mandela National Stadium pitch. 4 corners with 25 players, and after 2 days, he'd what?
Cut them in half.
Cut them in half.
So for me, there are so many undercooked players who will make it there, and maybe that explains some of the decisions. But it also feeds into the word I was using, the one that the FUFA president loves to use, the word to do it, transition. Yes, clearly, Uganda's transition from the Dennis Onyango era has been mismanaged. Because you do not start to do a transition after the players who are playing currently retire. At the time when everyone noticed that the Nyangos could be gone, probably maybe we should have all started seeing the signs in 2016 that these players had been together since perhaps around 2008. So after nearly a decade, they were going to exit at some point. So maybe that transition should have started anyway around 2015. Maybe you should have had a few players in that side that went to the AFCON in 2017. They do not have to play every other game, but then they are around the setup. Now what you find presently is that because they all decided to walk away at the same time, then FUFA and the coaching staff had to jump around to get players. Then they go and try that and throw players in. Then when the players struggle a bit, then they have to call back Joseph Ochaya, you know, you notice,
Salim Jamal.
And Salim Jamal after a 2-year hiatus. So there's that thing, and I've always put this in one simple explanation. It explains so many of the things that happen in Ugandan football, Ugandan sport, and there's a lot of popcorn. When you look at popcorn in a saucepan, you don't know where the next one is going to come from. So there's a lot of popcorn. The way we conduct business in football, sometimes appears like popcorn. Now maybe all of us are learning a lesson about the failures of managing what we'll have to call a transition. Now that we've learned of that failure, with the national team failing to qualify for the last AFCON in Cameroon, and now on the brink of qualifying or not qualifying for Ivory Coast, maybe after this then we'll act better.
Yeah. What I personally see is that FUFA, and I think they have the right intentions. They've been, apart from the word transition that the FUFA president uses very often, the other word is a project. I think it's the word that has also been used around FUFA House in Mengo. With good intentions, they are promoting players from the under-20 team, or players that graduated from the under-20 team, promoting them to the senior national team. But while they are doing it with probably the best of intentions, I think they are sort of rushing it. They are doing it overzealously, or they are too eager to show the country that there is some structure behind the national team. Like you have players graduating from the FUFA Juniors League, then they go and play for the under-17 team. Actually, even right from the under-15, under-17, the FUFA Juniors League, then graduate to the under-20 team, and then are promoted to the senior national team, the Cranes. But I think that process is being rushed. We are being given the figures because the numbers are there. For example, that team, the team that played the double header against Tanzania, you can easily mention 5-6 names of players that graduated from the under-20 team in 2021 to the current setup. But in trying to show that project, and how organized it has been. And to be honest, and to be fair, I think there has been a huge improvement in terms of youth football involvement, the participation, and then competing. When we were growing up, me and Ismail were a bit older than you. There was basically
that is relief. That's a lift.
There was nothing to show for in terms of youth football. You would play just the one game, and you talk about that game for the next 2 years, one international friendly, and you talk about that for the next 2 years. So currently, what we have is a huge improvement on previous years. But I think in trying to show that FUFA is organized and there are structures and projects that are coming up, I think they've sort of rushed this under 20 graduates and being thrown in at the deep end with the senior national team. And in that regard, I think there is a generation that we seem to have sacrificed. A generation that is not entirely experienced.
Seated, what I hear you saying, Elvis, is
that not that young.
Our national team is yet to suffer more in the near future with poor results and poor performances. Then this takes us back to the grassroots. Let's interrogate the grassroots of football. By and large, when you look at the National League, professionalism is still lacking, and so you do look at the coaches, the players, the investors. Everyone is having not premature, but selfish intentions as to why they're in there. The players are in there because I could do it on Kataka, so I think I am worthy to be here. Then you do have the coaches who, just because they know how to throw some drills here and there and to get someone to do a certain skill, we think that that's professionalism, but they don't really have the backbone of the professionalism on how to do it, to be able to dispense and really bring out the best in terms of the skills of players. Then you have the investors. Some clubs are owned by authorities, some clubs are owned by gagas, some clubs are owned by communities. So even that also speaks into the nature of football that you're having at the grassroots. So why should we expect so much from a national team player when the bottom is rotten?
You used the word selfish interests, and it stuck with me. I think everyone in life starts with a selfish interest. The one thing I like about the rest of you and is that you're not able to turn your selfish interest into a public good. We politicians are able to do that. You can turn a selfish interest into a public good. Everyone starts to see that you're the right person. And you cite some very salient issues. And growing up, I was lucky to live in a place where Majid Musisi, probably the best footballer I've ever watched in this country, trained every single day, and had the chance to throw him a ball as a 6-7-year-old, throw him a ball to kick every morning. And perhaps that feeds into how passionate I am about club football. And I've always argued that for all the challenges that Ugandan football faces, and many of the people show up around the Uganda cranes, valid. You cannot blame people for their choices. But I've always argued that we need to sort out the club football, the club setup. Of course, FUFA have tried some of it on paper, some of it actually active. You talk about the number of coaches they've trained. The numbers have gone up astronomically. Now we need some kind of to put them in a pool and start to judge their quality and know which ones we must concentrate on them and then fast track. Then
first get the quantity and
then the quality will improve. Of course, I've had that a lot with the UPE, but that hasn't changed from when UPE started, I think 1997. So there's a lot of things there with the football where the quantity has improved. Now we need to move to the quality. The other things, I always worry about how weak clubs are in terms of decision making. That they have titles of people in clubs are called CEOs, but actually they are just another follower of the Mugaga because they have no power to make decisions.
Or one of those abused positions in Ugandan
Ugandan football. and then they throw in the word manager, the one that Elvis doesn't like.
I cannot be okay, in the Ugandan setting, there is a way that when you describe it as a manager, a financier, basically.
Yeah, you're a financier. So there's challenges with the club football now that has a trickle-down effect. Because Ugandan clubs and Ugandan football today is entirely dependent on schools. Is entirely dependent on Chitende, Chibuli, Chitovu, Jipra. I could go on and on. All the schools around the country, old Kampala before all Kololeses, the ones that invest in football. So they're entirely dependent on schools. So there is nothing around the football structure that has been set up to actually feed the structures. If a school chose today, and we all know, for example, with old Kampala, when Raphael Wire left the school, I think upon retirement, we know how much it's declined as a football school. So until we are able to enable clubs have resources to set up these structures and our players come in from the age of 8, we are going to depend on something that is beyond our powers or abilities.
Yeah, actually, what I pick from the question that you asked and Ismail's response is that as a country we have set the wrong priorities. We have the wrong priorities because we are so used to getting the results and all. We are demanding for results from the Cranes team, but like you've alluded, the kitchen where the food is being prepared is what we should be looking at.
Not even the kitchen, actually, the farm.
Where
the seeds are being planted.
Yeah, where they are being planted. The truth is, while maybe the current Cranes coach, Milutin Sredevich Micho, might have his issues, and there are quite many. The truth is,
they're only inherited.
Yeah, thank you. He spends very little time with these players. He's good, probably at most maybe 2 weeks, and this is quite long for international football to spend 2 weeks with club players. But the question we should be asking Magogo or the FUFA establishment, and whoever might be in charge, Magogo might leave the following day, and even before him, there are people before him. The question that we should be asking the people in charge of football in the country is what kind of idea or philosophy do they want? Like, there has to be a deliberate way, the way the country has to play. And we've seen that with many established nations. And for me, that is the most important question. Actually, when you go down, when you watch youth football and lower league football, you see that while there has been a significant improvement, every team just plays to get results. There is hardly a mention of player development. Players are just thrown in and they just want to get results from them, get promoted, go higher. There is, right from, say, 10 to 12 years, the country does not have an identity. Get that identity, then some things will start falling in place. So what Micho gets is a bit of players with different abilities and used to play a certain way with their clubs, and you have 1 week to impart your ideas into those players and all. So for me, it has to start, there has to be a direct intention. And for me, and I'll start with crediting FUFA for improving so many things in football. But they've failed with the technical bit. You can talk about the marketing, the administration, the infrastructure, that is all improving. But the technical bit, apart from the numbers that we've talked about of coaches, the quantity is improving, but the quality is very low. And if that does not improve, we are going to still produce those popcorn moments that Ismail describes very well. Unless we change, we're not going to improve as a country. Just have a direct, build a technical department. For example, when you go to FUFA House these days, you find there was just one building, then there was another addition, and then a further extension. There are 3 buildings. So in terms of infrastructure, you can clearly see it is visible. There has been an upward turn. Then administratively, many of these departments, you can see when they tell you that there is a communications department, they're actually talking about a department, and you can name 10 people because you
can actually see the work. If you don't know the people, you can see the work the communication people are doing.
They are doing. Yeah. Now, technically, who exactly is in charge of the technical department at FUFA. If you can mention names, you're going to mention not more than 2 names. You can mention a Bashir Mutiaba or an Ali Mwebe. But for God's sake, they cannot be in charge. They cannot know everything. They cannot do everything.
Up to the ground.
From by the way, Bashir Mutiaba does a very good job, being in charge of development, football development. I think in the country, he has a pool that he chooses from, right from the under 15, under 17, and all. But it cannot be a one-man job. It cannot be the technical department cannot have only 2 people. Maybe there are some others. If they are there, they're not. They're doing an extremely very poor job.
Okay. He has mentioned something of style, the style of football we play. South Americans.
Identity.
Identity. South Americans have had a continuous identity. The Europeans have a continuous identity. Interrogating Uganda. Let's pick it up from the team that went to the finals back in '78 to that. Do we have a style of or identity of football for Uganda, or we've had different identities? And what are those?
If I have regrets in life, is not having a chance to watch Philip Omondi, and there are not very many. I'm very able to live in the moment, but very unlucky not to have to watch Philip Omondi when he took Uganda to the Nations Cup final in 1978. But I'm told, because I've spoken to a lot of people who watched him, luckily we didn't have the ingenuity to have all these television pictures put together. Uganda was a very stylish football country in terms of an attacking sense, because when they realized most of the forward players lacked the size, so they decided to be very attack-minded, and that stretches into one of the most famous games I think Uganda has ever played. Back in 1987, Uganda beat Cameroon at Nachivubo by 3-1. And that's a Cameroon side that 3 years later beat Argentina in the World Cup Opener in 1990, and then eventually became the first African side to reach the quarterfinals of the World Cup. All those many years ago. So then after that translated into a club year in KCCA that was called Kawowo, because they played a certain brand of football, and the bulk of that 78 team of course came from KCCA. Then thereafter that style was copied by Villa, because then Villa was signing all the best players under Patrick Kawoya. Then you go into the early 90s Express, following their ban in the 70s, and everything struggled when they returned after the fall of the government in 1979, struggled in the 80s. Then got in a coach in David Oti, went and brought a lot of young players. Then that's the era, I think, of James Chirinya, then eventually Kefa Kisala and all these others. And there was a lot of, by then, now Express became a lot of wing play, because Express, even for us who watch them much later, with players like Ibrahim Buwembo, they spread the ball out wide and then were very lethal off a wing. Because they played the game at a very fast pace, from the passing and control of KCCA. So there was quite a blend. Then, thereafter, the game started to decline. I think from around the mid-90s, despite having players of exceptional quality like Jackson Mann and Majid Musisi, I think from those losses against Egypt and Tunisia in the mid-90s, the game started to decline. Then, thereafter, we started to want to find a result. Then that's when we started to focus on the end, and I don't know, sometimes I want to ask what is more important. And I can imagine the people who run the federation are thinking the end justifies the means in economics. They are thinking
that's
the
for all,
process.
That's for all politicians.
For all politicians. I don't, and many times, and this feeds into, maybe politicians come from a place where if I want a road to be done in Bugweri, it does not matter what the process of procurement was. Now what we are discussing here is the process. Now for the person running the game, who wants to go and sell to a corporate entity, who wants to meet the president at State House and get money, the end is bigger than the process. So we go to a stage where all these things of the exceptional wing play of Express, the KO of KCCA, and Villa trying to copy, and actually Villa copying both. Because Villa were just a winning machine, they copy a bit of what Express were doing, they copy what of KCCA were doing, and then put that together. After all that, we started to focus on the end and not the process.
Actually,
and we've stayed there since.
When you state that, you remind me that as you described that period, or those years ago, there was at least one particular club that stood out or that was exceptional. So basically, league football was so strong, was so important to the football league structure, which is not quite the same at the moment. And there has been a decline over several decades. When you describe that Express team of the early 90s, you also described
up to 96. Yeah.
Also described that Villa team, probably from what, 98 to 2004. Then previously KCCA, maybe for a brief period, 97, and then a lot earlier in the 70s and all. There were clubs that stood out. At the moment, we have a league where KCCA might be top at the moment, and Villa second and all. But the truth is, there is no outstanding team from the league. You cannot sit here and comfortably, we've watched lots of football, but you cannot sit here and comfortably say there is one team that is so good, they're going to beat up on the rest. Basically, we've sort of neglected league football, and right from the lower leagues. There has been, and it's happened over, it's not with the current
you cannot actually just blame the current FA.
It's been ongoing for years. We have neglected league football right from the 5th division and up to the top division, and once our league does not quite contribute, or at least does not produce sufficient quality, then it will always end up with the national team. And I think that's an area of huge concern for me.
Of the season getting themselves a slot in the national team.
Well, we've played We've played about 18, 20 games, about 20 games in the league this season. The top scorer has 7 goals. They're about 3-4. And you're thinking 7 goals and 20 games in terms of quality and consistency.
It clearly shows you that.
And then we go to the national team and
the politics element that you brought in earlier. Let's look at the press that FUFA had yesterday. The Daily Monitor this morning has said FUFA deflect Micho call to September. What does that mean?
Yesterday, the FUFA president, Moses Magogo, addressed a press conference, and there were several things in there. And I can imagine when they chose to have this press conference, the idea was to control the narrative in the aftermath of the result between Uganda and Tanzania. Remember, the press conference was announced before the game. So I think they were ready to manage what was supposed. It's a very smart way of managing communication, and being a communication student myself, I give them a plus on that. That they were ready to manage it. Then in that press conference, the FUFA president Moses Magogo said that they will not make a decision on Micho until the campaign for qualifiers is done, actually. And the last game of this qualifier will be away in Niger coming September. And he also went on to say that they are going to recruit coaches on a permanent basis, including the assistant to Micho, who is Colonel Moses Basena. I think earns on per diem and some kind of allowances. Yeah, so now what they are going...
Let's get it from the horse's mouth. So why should we speak for him?
Now the head coach of the Uganda under-23 Corps. As a full-time job, as FUFA, we have taken a decision to establish the fitness training unit. And the person in charge of the national team will have a full-time job.
The changes will also see the Hippos coach working alongside the under-17 and under-15 team coaches as his assistants.
There will be the head coach of the Uganda Hippos, and this will be a full-time job, but it will be supported by 2 assistants, one for the under-17 and one for the under-15.
Following the innovations, all the junior men's national team technical roles have been declared vacant and are up for grabs to interested coaches.
Other than the senior national teams, that's the Uganda Cranes and under-23 category, as we have already mentioned, the rest of the positions are declared vacant.
Regarding Mitchell's fate as Cranes coach, Magogo confirmed his performance will only be assessed at the end of the ongoing AFCON qualifiers.
For the senior national teams, we shall analyze and appraise their performance at the end of the AFCON 2023, and if there is any decision to be made, it will be made then.
In the changes announced by FUFA President.
Well, thank you so much, Justin. Okay, so I've heard it from the horse's mouth. Where do we go from here? Interpretation and translation of what he shared yesterday in the presser.
First of all, it's managing the narrative. And in that press conference, he also said these decisions were taken in an EXCOM meeting on March 18th, way before Uganda flew out to go and play that game in Ismailia. I think it's a bit of managing the narrative. I think some of the announcements are extremely welcome, to have coaches with stable contracts and they are paid for it, so the attention is supposed to be there. I'm actually not...
So when he says full-time, that means that they have no other coaching responsibility,
yeah,
no club coaching, nothing, entirely duty to the national team.
And the one I like
which
the
is
most...
long overdue.
Long overdue. The one I like the most is when FUFA now say the under-20 national team coach will be there full-time, and then they have an under-17 and under-15 coach who are also full-time, but these head coaches of under-15 and under-17 then are assistants with the under-20. I've seen this done in several countries where, especially I think Nigeria, they started this more, you could go back as maybe 20 years ago when Samson Siasia was coaching the juniors team, and he grew with that group until when he became national team.
So what you're basically telling us
are also confused
is that
they've since changed that.
They've since changed that.
So if we want to see that translation of football, it's going to take us 20 years with the implementation of this. So that means that we're still
not
in
necessarily
a hole
20 years, but
for another 20 years.
Yeah, it takes some time. It's a bit of time. For example,
I wouldn't mind 20 years if you are doing the right thing.
For example, after Germany performed dismally, that was at
the 98
World Cup and Euro 2000.
Yeah.
They set the clock back and decided first they are going to play a certain way, the whole country play a certain way, and then sort of not exactly disbanding, but they did away with the older generation of players, and they waited and rebuilt patiently. They went to the 2006 World Cup, reached the semi-finals, played some good football, and then from 2000 to 2010, then 2010 they became very competitive, and eventually that led to a World Cup at some point in
sadly beating Argentina
in 2014. So there has to be it will take time.
Coming back to the national coaches, you do have Jackson Mayanja, who has been fired from duty with the Hippos.
I don't like the word fired.
Because he failed to qualify the team for World Cup, right? Now, in September, if Mitchell does not qualify the Uganda Cranes for AFCON, and his counterpart has been fired for not qualifying the team for World Cup, what are the stakes?
I love listening to leaders when they speak. A lot of the time I listen, even sometimes when they say a lot of garbage. But I'll give you the attention and listen. One of the things that Moses Magogo mentioned there, he says FUFA, and he refers actually to himself, that he's not there to take, first of all, decisions with emotion, and then he has argued severally that he does not just take popular decisions. He thinks he will take the right decision. Now, the most popular decision Magogo could have taken this week is to sack Mitchell, because everyone would be behind him. Perhaps even the people who started Magogo out would go and delete their tweets. But he said we are not going to take popular decisions. So what happens then? I don't think Mitchell's popularity is going to skyrocket. There are sometimes when I feel his relationship with Ugandans has become extremely toxic. That regardless of the result, people are going to criticize him, because some people are going to criticize the style, others are going to criticize the language, some people are going to some people do not like how he reacts to criticism, those kind of thing. Now, what happens in the case that in September Uganda has qualified for the AFCON? What then happens to Mitchell? If at least Mago says they'll do a review, and that's how I think that's how decisions should be taken in organizations. You do not take decisions in the heat of the moment and then decide because you have a microphone in front of you and then promise that since I have a microphone in front of me, this year all the children are going to have milk. I
actually think
let them first have shoes.
Magogo is a politician, for starters, and a clever one at that. So I won't buy his argument. The truth is, Micho bought himself time, or rather, Rogers Mato bought Micho some time.
If bought everyone time, including FUFA.
Micho.
He has served the nation, he has served the critics, he has served
Uganda
the
not won that
he has
game.
served the federation.
I don't think Micho would still be in charge of the team. But
when Elvis, you and I know that Moses Magogo, while he denies, we have it with authority, that last June, in the aftermath of that game against Niger in Chitende, he told Micho that you have to beat Tanzania to stay in the job.
Yeah, actually, I think that this double header was postponed.
Yeah.
Because I think Uganda played Tanzania in CHAN qualifiers.
Yeah.
Eliminated them, qualified for CHAN, and then they were supposed to play this double header. I think in the space of about
it was supposed to be somewhere in November. Then the teams that were heading to the World Cup.
So it was postponed. For me, if it was not the result, if it wasn't yesterday, if it wasn't Tuesday's result, Micho would be out of the job.
Therefore, let's see how Micho will keep the job in September.
You mentioned something about Jackson Mayanja and all the other coaches losing their jobs. I think one of the criticisms that I can point at the current federation is they've given an opportunity to Micho and have allowed him to make the mistakes that he's made, and they've not given the local coaches others.
Yet he has been fired all the way from down the continent, then somewhere.
So maybe because he has some bit of history, having led the nation back to the Nations Cup.
The paper is there, the pen is there. How does Micho keep his job after September?
He has to take Uganda to the AFCON. Do I need to write that?
Yes.
AFCON 2023 will happen somewhere in January and February.
In Ivory Coast.
In Ivory Coast. If Uganda qualifies, then you might stick with him, because why then do I discover oil, then I leave power? In that kind of an analogy. Why then does Micho qualify to the team the AFCON and then doesn't get a chance to coach it there? Maybe if he gets a better opportunity, because in coaching, Uganda is not the highest paying job, and this is one of the arguments I raise always with people, what they want, who they want to coach Uganda, and what we can actually afford.
That's actually the reason why Dusabre jumped
time
ship.
is first spent for us, but let's look into the 6 months. By the way, within those 6 months, you still have the Nambole question mark. Will it be ready for June, hosting a game there? You do have State Minister coming out to assure us, Peter Gwang, that we shall be able to have our home game at Nambole.
Good luck.
So we have 3 months to that, then 6 months to see if Micho stays the course of the national team at Uganda Cranes. Now that brings us to the wrap of this conversation. Thank you so much for having been with us. We're going to be having our Kickstarter, relevance of special effects in theatrical production. Chris, again, you will be right back for that.